All right, so if you are using the hand router, take your time here, right? If you're at the hand router here, you've already machined your board to rough length. At first, you've jointed an edge, you've ripped it to width, you've planed it, you've then cut to final size. You maybe have done a rough or initial sanding. Then you're at the hand router. So you've already gone through with that workpiece so many steps. Take a quick second to verify that the router bit that you intend on using is the right one. How you do that? Of course, you can take a visual look at it. You can see if it references or matches the examples here of that router. But then also prior to taking that machine, that little hand tool, to your final piece that, like I said, you've already done all these steps to, try to take that piece to a small little scrap chunk. And you don't need to do a huge, full router profile, but you can just do a small section and verify that that's the router profile that you intend on using. Does that match the other components of your project? Does that match what you have in mind? Is that burning really bad on that other test cut? Ideally, that test cut that you machine, if you can find a piece your same species, that would be even better. It's there are minor differences on how each piece machines. But for example, oak might chip out way more. Maple might burn way more because it's a bit more dense. So testing it on your practice piece with that correct species can definitely help translate over to your main piece more accurately with you getting kind of what you want out of that process there. To talk about a hand router, very basic tool, but honestly, these small little tools, it's kind of where some of our safety concerns come in. When that tool is in a smaller footprint, typically it's kind of less respected. If you look at a massive table saw or a massive planer or a massive joiner, you can see the significance of that. But typically when that tool is light, when it's small, when it's, when it looks a bit less intimidating, it's oftentimes less respected. And over the last couple of years, we've had a couple situations with a hand router, whether that be not having both hands on the router, or it could be going in the wrong direction. But even with a tool of this size, bad things can truly still happen, all right? We use a router profile to ease the edge. Looking at your fingers, they're already nice and rounded over. You don't need to router your fingers there. It will not look nearly as good as the side of your material. All right, so to dive into a router, you have your lock here for your height. You have your plate here that you strategically set that off of your router bit in a certain kind of depth. You can pop that up there. You can push that button there, this button here, and that will pop off. Then you can, if I can find my wrench, then you can change out your router bit. You can push that button there. You can lock that locks this in place. Without that, this just free spins with that being clicked in. It will pause and lock into place. Then with some force, you can get that popped out. You have on your router bit, you have a shank. You have your shank part of your router bit that goes into your collet. Here, a collet. Here, a collet. There's a bunch of like slices or cuts kind of around there. As that gets tightened up, this gets all compressed. It's on like a taper or a wedge in there. Then that bit is squeezed in. Right now it's a loose kind of fit, but as we tighten up this nut here, it will compress and it'll hold this very, very, very steady. So the reason for me saying that, if you are changing out a router bit, make sure you snug this up nice and snug, nice and tight, to make sure that that router bit doesn't come loose at all. If you're ever in the future using the router and your profile is changing mid-cut, say if you're going from this part of the board here on over, and if you visually see or hear or feel the router taking off more material and you're not expecting that, of course, stop in that moment, right? Shut it off, bring it back, look at it. Anytime you're going to diagnose and put your hands in contact with any moving parts, take power away from that tool. This is a battery operated tool, so it's pretty hard to remember that at times because we don't physically plug it in. Often we plug in our battery, and it's easier to forget, kind of to disconnect that when you're making adjustments, when you're taking bits in and out. That's how you do that, just like a regular drill. Push that there, that can pop out. And anytime you're making any adjustments to that, take power away from the source. It takes no time at all. And this is a mechanical feature. We wouldn't want that switch to fail in some sort of way and to turn on when you're in there working on it. All right, so that's a bit of the safety components there. Back to kind of what router profiles can do. We at this time have a few different router profiles that we typically use. We have a cove, which cuts on in an interior kind of curve there with a cove. We have some different sized roundovers. Roundover is just when you're easing the edge there on a nice, smooth, consistent radius. You have an 1/8 inch roundover. That's the diameter or the radius of that radius. Then you have a 1/4 inch one here where it's a bit bigger, right? And it's all about personal preference. You know, Billy might like having all roundovers. Susie might like having, you know, a lot of coves, or like a chamfer where you cut just on a straight angle. You could do this cut here on a table saw where you put that blade on a slight angle to whatever degree you want to. We have 45-degree chamfers at this time, but you could do an angle or a chamfer at any sort of angle so you desire. All right, so we have a lot of different kind of choices. And in Woods 2, 3, we have even more choices, but at this time with profiles set up right in a router that's labeled in the height set, this is what we have at this time. And it's really convenient to have router profiles just set up where you guys can walk on over, grab one off the wall, and you can, you know, grab it, still do a test cut really quick, just because like I said off the top, you don't want to grab a piece or grab a router and just quickly take it to your main piece and have an oopsie moment. I'd rather you test that out on a scrap piece just briefly. It'll take a couple minutes to find a piece that you can cut, to router it, then most importantly, put that back where you found it. Don't leave it on the bench. But those couple minutes of that investment is absolutely worth your time to ensure that on your actual piece, it goes properly and correctly. All right. When you're routering pieces, especially when they're really small like this, I want you to squeezy clamp them off the side of the bench. All right, so I want you to grab one of our squeezy clamps. You can clamp onto it. How you use this guy here, you have that silver gray part right there. You click that in and you can move it kind of free. Once that's not there, you can squeeze that and that will engage that, you know, right there. So you can pop that off, pop that there, and then squeeze it. So click that in there. And then at this point, my board is nice and steady, right? It's not moving all around. When I'm routering, I'm not pushing in super hard. I want to keep gentle pressure with that router bearing on that bit. I want to keep that silver wheel part gently pressed up against the side of the board. That's what tracks and keeps my bit going in my direction that I want. But I'm not pushing super hard. I'm putting, you know, gentle pressure there and gentle pressure on down here, but you're moving at a consistent, kind of slow pace. If you try to go super fast, a couple things could happen. Obviously, that could move and become off the table and become loose and have a problem there. You could be chunking out, ripping out material, you know, because you're trying to machine too quickly. You could be, you know, wearing down the machine more quickly. You could be absolutely wearing out the bit at a much higher rate than if you were moving at a nice, consistent, accurate kind of pace. And you'll feel that out. If you're getting chunks ripped out, like I said, you're probably going too fast. If you are getting a lot of burn marks where the edge of that piece is burning, I don't have an example near me, where it's leaving a dark burn spot, maybe you're going too slow in that spot there. Try to be nice and consistent and rolling on through. And if you're pausing in one spot for too long, you're probably going to get a burn mark. And that's going to take much longer at a later date to hand sand out compared to going at a nice consistent pace, taking your time. It's kind of the tortoise and the hare situation there, where taking your time and going at a much nicer, consistent pace will save you time later on by hand sanding. I don't know about you, but I would rather router in a good, consistent pace and not have a burn mark rather than kind of sloppily go through this only to then later on need to hand sand that a bunch. It's not easy to sand out burn marks on different router profiles. Some are easier than others, right? If I have a big burn mark on a cove here on the inside of that, that's going to be difficult to get a piece of sandpaper rolled around and sand out the inner curve there. If I have it on the side of a roundover, that's not as bad. I can get a piece of sandpaper that flows around that edge nice, and I can work that in with kind of the shape of my hand there and work that in a bit quicker. If I have a chamfer, that's even easier. With it being a straight angle, I could use a block and a piece of sandpaper to sand that out. So it's kind of, depending on your router profile, how much of a problem having a burn mark might kind of cause you later on. But getting back to kind of your work holding and your setup kind of process here for your hand router, you have your small piece, you have a squeezy clamp holding that onto that there. I like to have you guys holding it off the edge of the table. Maybe you're routering some really thin material where once that's placed on there, it is the case where that top of that router bit might be sticking out further than the workpiece there. If I had, in that situation where I had that down there, it's not really going to cut. It's just going to kind of like a spin top ride along the table there, and it's not going to cut a full profile. So having that hung off the side of the bench is how you're going to get a full profile in that way there. So just getting in a good habit of hanging off the bench. It keeps our bench, obviously this one's pretty tore up, but it keeps it from getting even worse. So again, you have your squeezy clamp on your small pieces. If you're machining a really large piece like a desktop or a dining room tabletop where you can use both your hand routers and move on through in that direction, if you can do that without that board sliding all around your bench, that's a-okay, that's just fine. But if it's a really small piece where it's hard to keep that steady, you don't want to be chasing that all around, it's definitely nice to take advantage of a squeezy clamp there. All right, so getting back to the work holding, got my squeezy clamp, I have my router, I keep both hands on the router. That avoids you having a hand off and somehow getting wrapped up into that kind of cutting process. Having both hands on the router keeps you nice and steady, keeps you nice and consistent. When you get to an object, maybe where it's pausing you from continuing, like this clamp here, you can keep it on and come right off, or you can just pause it right there. I like to kind of come off when it's on, just so I don't stop in that area there and potentially have a burn mark where I paused my feed kind of in that direction. But you can, router different segments, pop your clamp, rotate it, and then you can carry on with kind of buzzing out all the other spots there. This, of course, is a hand router. We have router tables and different things like that. But for a piece where it's really big, I oftentimes like to take a hand router to that piece where I'm not trying to muscle this big old tabletop through a router or a router table like this. Can we zoom over here, please, for a moment? I wasn't planning on doing this, but it's kind of here. Instead of taking a big old tabletop and trying to muscle it through a router table like so, I can then take instead, like we were talking about, a small little tiny compact hand router and machine my given part. If I have a bunch of really small parts like this, instead of machining all of those with a hand router, I can buzz around there with a router table, and that'd be much easier. But getting back to the hand router over here, it's nice to have a small compact tool where you can make your cutting operation there and you're holding onto a small piece and moving around your big piece there. To get wrapped up here, you have your hand router, 2 hands here, turn it on, move it in, go counterclockwise. I say counterclockwise because in this view right here, I might be going left to right, but in this view here, if I were to go left to right, you'd be going in the opposite direction of that bit, and it would be feeding your material too quickly. Compared to counterclockwise, it keeps the direction of that bit in the right way, where you're controlling the pace of that feed. If you're going the other way, it would be like, for example, on the table saw, feeding your board in the wrong way, where it would take that board and kind of launch it. In the same way here, it would take the router bit and it would feed it kind of too fast, and you wouldn't be expecting that feed to be going that quick of a pace where you can get wrapped up. If you didn't have both your hands on it, you could more rapidly go in that direction and get caught up in that situation there. But again, hand router, we have so many different router profiles, and we use it on our really large pieces or our really detailed pieces where we're trying to start and stop in an exact location. But this is so much easier to grab onto a hand router and take it to a big, large piece than try to muscle a big, huge tabletop through a small router table like so.